Until I was 38 years old, I peed my pants anytime I laughed. Only when I laughed, not when I coughed or jumped or sneezed. I spent my entire life trying to cover this up and failing. I couldn't stop laughing, and when I laughed, I couldn't stop from peeing. And it wasn't like I just leaked a little urine. It was full bladder emptying. I had no control over it, and every day it would happen again and again, leaving me in a deep spiral of shame. I worked furiously to convince myself that it wasn't that big of a deal, fooling myself into thinking that no one else noticed. Growing up, my accidents weren't discussed in my family. My parents simultaneously pretended it didn't happen, and they blamed me for it. They never took me to the doctor. My mother could shame me with just a sigh. My father would drop his head in his hands, and the message was clear. Jesus Christ, this again? I felt like it was my fault. One of the stories my parents like to tell about my childhood is how interested I was in bathrooms. Wherever we were, I wanted to know where the bathroom was. They missed or ignored the real reason for my interest, instead laughing about how weird I was. Have you ever known a kid so obsessed with bathrooms? I would try to pee constantly, hoping it wouldn't happen again. But it didn't fix the problem, and then I had to go back to those bathrooms again to clean myself up, literally marinating in my own pee, warm, then cold and pungent. I started padding my underwear with toilet paper as far back as I can remember. I thought I had it down to a science. Who was I going to be with? How funny were they? How funny was I with them? But despite my calculations, it was never enough. The efforts to conceal were intense and endless. I always had one of my many sweatshirts with me to wrap around my waist after the inevitable accident. I grew up in Santee, and even when it was 100 degrees in the summer, I carried one with me in case I get cold. When I consider my lifetime's worth of friends' couches, beds, and rugs I tried to surreptitiously clean up, I feel exhausted. Attempting to keep a secret that big for so long, a secret that impacted my daily life, was a heavy burden for a child. The persistent anxiety created by the fear of being found out had an impact on every part of my life. All I wanted was to be the same as the other kids without having to take daily preventative measures to conceal a problem that would make me a social pariah. As I entered puberty, I was even more self-conscious. New smells and changes to my body only intensified my worry. I started drinking gallons of water to dilute my urine. My youth group leader nicknamed me Camel because I guzzled so much water and never went to the bathroom. Oh, youth group leader Stephanie, I went to the bathroom all the time. It was just in my pants. The positive about puberty was the introduction of maxi pads, which replaced my toilet paper padded panties. Then I just had to explain why I constantly had to change my pad. Who has their period every single day of the month? I was always full of fear that someone would notice, but also convinced that no one knew. Denial is incredibly powerful. It feels so real. If I'm pretending it's not happening, then other people must be in the dark too. The thing about denial is its power doesn't extend to others. They see things clearly. When I was 19, my best friend at the time, Jessica, called me out. We were headed to Tijuana to party for the night. We were already drunk. Jessica and I bounced around without seatbelts, laughing hysterically. I was wearing a mesh black shirt with a black bra underneath and a teeny tiny skirt. I didn't have anywhere to hide. I just had a little accident. She stared at me with a look reminiscent of my father's and said, "That happens all the time." I felt the heat of shame come over my face, and I felt like I was in trouble yet again. But that was it. We never spoke of it again. It was my fault. I carried the deception on for many more years after that. One of the reasons I knew I would marry the man who became my husband is because I told him the truth about it. He was the first person I told. He really saw me, and it felt so glorious that I wanted to share all of me. Scott urged me to go to a doctor. I was hopeful for a solution when I saw a young urologist. She was soothing and her demeanor was calm. She sat down and looked me in the eye, assuring me lots of women have urinary incontinence. She said, I know this is hard to talk about. She put me through a battery of tests, which all turned up normal. They were so demoralizing. One of them included me drinking a ton of water and then having to sit on a toilet in a lab while she and an assistant watched to see if I could lose control of my bladder. Of course, there was not anything funny about what was happening. So nothing happened. I told her over and over again, it only happens when I laugh. She kept side-eyeing me through the appointment. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. Is this woman for real? Eventually, she ended the appointments telling me, there's no problem, best of luck and all that. So much for the empathy. After being persuaded to see someone and sharing the most shameful part of my life, I was dismissed. I sobbed the entire drive home and refused to talk about it with Scott. I was done getting help. A few years later, after I had my daughter, a good friend told me she was having her bladder fixed. She said, after 4 kids, I'd like to be able to cough without peeing myself. So I asked her for the name of her doctor, and I carried the card around with me for months. At that point, I was 37 years old, and the secret and my rituals around it were a part of me. One night, Scott and I were goofing around. I was making up a song and dance in the living room, as I do nightly during our nightly jocularity hour. And I started laughing at my own ridiculousness. I emptied my entire bladder on our new bamboo floors and collapsed into tears. He ran over and held me in a puddle of my urine and humiliation. The next day, I decided to call the number on the card I'd looked at 1,000,000 times. Within 5 minutes of meeting and talking to me, the soft-spoken doctor, old enough to be my grandpa, said, "You have giggle incontinence." I looked at him and started to laugh. But only for a second, lest I demonstrate my issue on his exam table. "Did you just make that up right now?" He smiled, saying, "There isn't really any research in it in adults because it's so rare. But it's not your fault." It was not my fault. He offered Ritalin, which works in children with giggle incontinence. As someone in recovery without ADD, a stimulant seemed like a bad idea. So I was back to square one. But at least I had a name for my problem, as absurd as it was. 6 months later, I decided to go to the best urologist in town. When Dr. Nager walked into the room and introduced himself by his first name, I fell in love with his kind, warm approach. It was nothing like the first time. I asked him if he was going to make me repeat those humiliating tests like the other doctor. He said, "Why would I do that to you?" He told me he had only seen one other adult patient with giggle incontinence in his 30 years of practice, but he would do everything he could to help me. He told me it wasn't my fault. Dr. Nager suggested an outpatient minor surgery, but with the caveat that in my particular case, there was only a 60% chance of it working. I said yes immediately. After 38 years, there was a possible solution. I would have taken a 10% chance at that point. I was willing to do anything to make it all go away. As soon as I got home from the surgery, I told Scott, "Make me laugh." I did not pee my pants. I started crying. Scott started crying. We tested it for hours. He danced for me. He told me terrible dad jokes. He showed me my favorite memes. He dressed up. He showed me clips of the movie Bridesmaids. I would laugh and then cry when I didn't pee. I send Dr. Nager a card every year on the anniversary of my surgery. There are not enough thank yous in the world. When I told my mother, she said, "I'm sorry we didn't take your problem more seriously. I just thought you needed to go to the bathroom more." She's also a master at hiding things, the truth, responsibility, and authentic apology. After a lifetime of blaming and shaming me, even when she found out it was a medical condition, she still isn't able to demonstrate any empathy. She just doesn't have it to give. Even though the doctor fixed my problem in just a few hours, the scars of it remain. I still take a sweater everywhere I go, and I still stand a lot just in case. 5 years of freedom haven't yet made up for 38 years of hiding. I've signed up for stand-up comedy classes, a hobby unthinkable for someone with giggle incontinence. But I don't pee when I laugh anymore. And I've got lots of time now that I don't have so much fucking laundry.
That was Lisa Howe.